Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. What happens when a single gunshot changes not just the course of one man's life, but shapes the destiny of an entire state? When a wounded bird's death throes reveal glittering gold beneath the harsh Arizona soil, when that same gold brings both extraordinary wealth and devastating ruin. Welcome to the forgotten story of Vulture City, Arizona, where fortunes were made and lost, where violence was as common as the scorching desert sun, and where one Austrian immigrant's fateful encounter with a vulture would lead to both riches beyond imagination and a tragic end by his own hand. In the 1880s, the heart of Vulture City pulsed around a sun-baked plaza dominated by imposing stone buildings. At its center lay a cavernous, stone-lined pit sealed with a heavy iron door, the bullion storage facility. This wasn't just any mining operation. This was the Vulture Mine, producer of what some estimate to be $100 million in gold when accounting for what vanished through theft. The buildings housed the general offices, assay offices for testing ore, and most importantly, the bullion room where gold awaited shipment to Phoenix. In those days, the Vulture Mine was no mere industrial operation. It was the economic engine that gave birth to the city of Phoenix itself. But before we dive deeper into the tale of the mine, we must first meet the man whose single gunshot would start it all. Heinrich Heinzel was born in Austria to a family of modest means. As a young man, Heinrich discovered coal on his family's land, a potential source of wealth and prosperity, but his father refused to mine it. Heinrich's frustration grew, and after his father's death, he attempted to extract and sell the coal himself. Only then did he discover the bitter truth. The government claimed mineral rights to his family's land. Facing potential imprisonment, Heinrich fled Austria, changing his name to Henry Wickenberg and sailing for America. By 1862, Wickenberg had made his way to Yuma, Arizona Territory. The former Austrian had developed prospecting skills and arranged to join Major Van Bibber's party, planning to meet them in La Paz before heading to Peoples Valley. But low water in the Colorado River prevented his timely arrival, and Van Bibber's group departed without him. Undeterred, Wickenberg embarked on a remarkable solo 200-mile trek through hostile desert terrain, a journey that would have broken less determined men. When he finally caught up with Van Bibber's party, the group spent weeks prospecting along the Hassayampa River with little success. Discouraged, many left until only 6 remained. Then in 1864, Wickenberg made a fateful decision. While others rested at their river camp, he ventured toward a distant peak, following rumors of potential gold. Setting up a small tent near the peak, Wickenberg noticed vultures circling overhead. Practical-minded, he decided to shoot one, not for food, but to use its wing as a makeshift broom for his tent floor. As the wounded bird thrashed on the ground, it revealed something extraordinary, glints of gold in the disturbed earth beneath it. Beneath the vulture lay one of the richest gold deposits ever discovered in Arizona. Wickenberg had literally stumbled upon a fortune. He quickly collected samples and returned to his companions, who joined him in filing a claim. For 10 weeks, the partners worked the site together, but the harsh conditions, particularly the lack of water, drove them away. Wickenberg remained alone, naming both the mine and the nearby peak Vulture in honor of the bird that revealed his fortune. What made the Vulture mine exceptional wasn't just its discovery, but its extraordinary characteristics. The gold lode consisted of nearly pure quartz, an unusually large exposed ore body that could be mined from the surface without extensive tunneling. The richness of this ore defied belief. Some reports valued it at $100,000 per ton, with gold content exceeding 25% in the richest sections. Such concentration created an irresistible temptation for theft that would plague the mine throughout its history. Initially, Wickenberg processed ore using the crudest methods. With help from Charles Genung, he built a simple grinding mill and used river water for sluicing. As operations expanded, he hired additional miners, but this decision would ultimately contribute to his downfall. Without proper assaying to determine the ore's exact value, Wickenberg remained unaware of just how rich his discovery truly was. His workers, however, quickly recognized the extraordinary gold content. A pattern of theft emerged. High grading, they called it, where miners diverted the richest ore for themselves and sent lower-grade material to Wickenberg for processing. Despite this theft, the mine's operations grew rapidly, creating an economic ecosystem that employed hundreds. Just 1 year after the mine's discovery, in 1865, Wickenberg sold it to B. Phelps of New York. But what seemed like a successful transaction soon turned into a legal nightmare. Phelps questioned Wickenberg's ownership rights, citing claims related to his departed partners. Confident in his legal position, Wickenberg sued the corporation, but the legal battle drained almost his entire $20,000 down payment. When the court ruled in favor of the company, Wickenberg was left with nothing substantial to show for his world-class discovery. Broken in spirit, he withdrew to a modest adobe house by the Hasayampa River, beginning a long period of bitterness that would last until his death. Meanwhile, the Vulture mine thrived without its namesake. Under B. Phelps, the operation extracted an enormous profit compared to the purchase price. Phelps invested in infrastructure, building mills at the mine site along with stone buildings for offices, bunkhouses for workers, stores for supplies, and homes for married workers. Vulture City grew around the mine, developing dozens of adobe structures and creating a true community. But Mother Nature had other plans. Miners encountered a geological fault that disrupted the main Talmadge vein, presenting a technical challenge that temporarily halted extraction. This began a pattern of fault encounters and ownership transfers, as new owners purchased the mine based on its known richness, only to discover the interrupted vein. Eventually, exploratory mining efforts relocated the vein, which widened and grew even richer. One section became so valuable it was named the $1 Million Stope, an extraordinarily wide area requiring rock pillars to prevent collapse. These support pillars would later play a critical role in disaster. When a Canadian owner named McLeod faced pressure to maintain continuous mill operation despite ore shortages, he made the fateful decision to mine the high-grade support columns themselves. This prioritization of short-term profit over mine integrity led to catastrophic structural failure, a ceiling collapse that created a massive surface depression known as the Glory Hole. Worse, it buried remaining high-value ore and destroyed geological indicators of the vein's path, causing long-term damage to the mine's future potential. Later attempts to relocate the main vein all ended in frustration. Life in Vulture City wasn't just about mining challenges. Violence and lawlessness were constant companions to the gold. Perhaps the most notorious incident involved the Valenzuela brothers, Inocente and Francisco, along with an unidentified third accomplice. The three horsemen approached the bullion room with 2 pack horses specifically brought for hauling stolen gold. When guards protested their entry, the bandits shot them without warning, killing both a guard and superintendent. While one bandit held the remaining office staff at gunpoint, the others entered the bullion chamber, discovering the door was conveniently unlocked, and loaded $75,000 in gold bars onto their pack horses. A shootout erupted as the bandits fled, with one killed during the escape attempt. The remaining two successfully escaped with the gold, burying it before confrontation with a hastily formed posse. Though one desperado was shot by the posse leader, the final robber escaped into the mesquite vegetation. After 2 months of pursuit and hiding, the last bandit was ambushed while attempting to recover the buried treasure, dying symbolically across the stolen gold bars. This was far from an isolated incident. Wells Fargo contracted to transport gold to Phoenix, but after repeated stage holdups and multiple drivers killed, they refused to continue services. The mining company tried alternative transportation methods, using pack horses along rough and devious desert routes. Initially successful, they eventually returned to conventional road transport, only to have the very first shipment robbed and both driver and guard murdered. Beyond gold-related violence, Apache raids presented a constant danger, requiring armed guards and strategically positioned riflemen on surrounding knolls. Over a 15-year period, more than 400 white settlers were killed, illustrating the extreme danger. In one horrific incident, a Wickenberg-Ehrenberg stage was ambushed at a turn in the road, leaving 6 passengers dead and a woman fatally wounded. The ironwood tree in the plaza became a grim symbol of frontier justice, with 19 men hanged from its branches for robbery, murder, and rape, the frequency of crime requiring harsh measures in a place far from formal law enforcement. While the Vulture mine's official yield was recorded as $17 million in gold, old-timers speculated the actual yield, accounting for high grading, might have approached $100 million. This systematic employee theft created hidden wealth distributed throughout the region, contributing to Arizona's development in ways impossible to fully calculate. In July 1905, Wickenberg walked from his home to a mesquite tree and, using a revolver, ended his own life. In a poetic and tragic connection, local legend suggests it was likely the same revolver he had used to kill the vulture that revealed the gold 4 decades earlier. From fortune to despair, the instrument that brought wealth became the instrument of death. Today, the ruins of Vulture City still stand in the Arizona desert, silent witnesses to a boom and bust cycle of human greed, violence, and misfortune. Somewhere beneath the earth, the displaced vein of the Vulture mine, that extraordinarily rich lode, remains hidden, perhaps waiting for some future technology to reveal its secrets. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold story. Three buildings stand alone in the Arizona desert, surrounded by no trespassing signs. Behind them lies a story of extraordinary gold, a monastery dropout who became a kingpin, and a string of murders that would make even the most hardened outlaws take notice. Imagine finding gold nuggets literally lying on the ground, waiting to be picked up. Now imagine a man so ruthless that he would orchestrate murders, manipulate an entire town, and ultimately name it after himself, only to meet his own violent end over a moral transgression eerily similar to the one that started his journey west. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we uncover the hidden histories of Southwest America's ghost towns and abandoned places. I'm your host, Alan, and today we're exploring the dramatic rise and fall of Stanton, Arizona, a town with a history as rich as its gold deposits and as dark as its abandoned mine shafts. The year was 1862. While the Civil War raged in the East, A different kind of history was unfolding in the rugged wilderness of what would later become Arizona Territory. Our story begins with Pauline Weaver, a remarkable figure in Western frontier history. Half Mexican, half Anglo Weaver was an Army scout temporarily off the payroll, known for his exceptional skills as a negotiator and communicator with Apache tribes. In an era when cultural divisions often proved deadly, Weaver moved between worlds with unusual ease, making him invaluable to settlers and prospectors. Weaver led a small band of prospectors into the hills of central Arizona. After shooting and butchering an antelope for dinner, a routine activity for frontier travelers, the group made camp beside a creek. During the night, their livestock strayed from camp, a common annoyance for travelers. As dawn broke, a search party following the tracks of the wandering mules made an extraordinary discovery. Thousands of dollars worth of gold nuggets simply lying on the ground, not buried deep in mountain quartz, not requiring panning or sluicing, but waiting to be collected like autumn leaves. The hill became famous as Rich Hill, and the waterways were named Antelope Creek and Weaver Creek, immortalizing both their dinner and their guide in geographical history. Word spread like wildfire. Within months, approximately 2,000 miners had flocked to the area, establishing the Rich Hill Mining District. The initial camp evolved into a settlement called Antelope, later renamed Antelope Station when a stage line was established. 4 distinct towns emerged: Antelope Station, Weaver, Octave, and Congress Junction. Weaver, settled primarily by Mexican miners, quickly became an outlaw hideout. Octave grew into a substantial town with a deep shaft gold mine. Congress Junction developed as a supply station for the entire district. But our story takes a sinister turn with the arrival of a man whose name would eventually replace Antelope Station on the map, Charles P. Stanton. Stanton's background was shadowy at best. Recently expelled from a monastery on morals charges, the exact nature of which remained carefully obscured, he carried with him the contradictions that would define his time in Arizona: religious education paired with moral corruption, refined speech alongside brutal actions. Despite this questionable past, he nonetheless managed to obtain respectable employment as a deputy county recorder upon arriving in the area. With pen and paper, he documented the claims and disputes of others, watching, learning, and making connections. But Stanton was a man of extraordinary ambition, and he quickly became dissatisfied with his status. In the quiet hours of evening, by lantern light, he began plotting a strategic path to success and power that would leave a trail of bodies in its wake. What made Stanton particularly dangerous wasn't just his willingness to resort to violence — that was common enough in mining towns — but his capacity for patient, calculated manipulation. He was a spider in the center of a growing web, pulling strings that others didn't even realize were attached to them. The first victims of Stanton's machinations were 2 successful storekeepers named Partridge and Wilson. Envious of their prosperity, Stanton created animosity between the partners through a campaign of rumors and counter-rumors. The breaking point came with the hog incident. When an animal wandered into Partridge's cabin causing damage, Wilson attempted to apologize on behalf of the hog's owner. Stanton, seeing an opportunity, had his cohort deliver a false message to Partridge, claiming that Wilson was gunning for him. Acting on what he believed was a threat to his life, Partridge shot Wilson dead. He was subsequently tried and convicted for murder, partially based on a confession written by Stanton himself. With Wilson eliminated, his partner Timmerman took over the store. Shortly thereafter, Timmerman's body was found along a road, conveniently coinciding with Stanton's business expansion. With his competition dwindling, Stanton consolidated his control over the town. He strategically rerouted the stage line to pass directly by his store and erected a sign renaming the town after himself. What had been Antelope Station became Stanton, Arizona. But one obstacle remained: Barney Martin, the stage agent whose position Stanton coveted. Threats were delivered to Martin by the Valenzuela gang from nearby Weavertown: leave or face death. Terrified, Martin sold his business and fled toward Phoenix with his family. He left word with Captain Calderwood at Coldwater Station about his departure and arranged a meeting point. When Martin failed to arrive at the arranged meeting point, Captain Calderwood set out along the trail toward Stanton, scanning the horizon for any sign of the wagon. What he discovered several miles from town was horrific beyond imagination: the charred remains of Martin's wagon, with the bodies of Martin and his entire family still inside, burned beyond recognition. The scene spoke of ruthless execution rather than random violence or accident. The Valenzuela gang was immediately suspected, their reputation for brutality well established in the territory, and behind them, pulling the strings like a dark puppet master, was believed to be Charles Stanton. Though Stanton was tried for orchestrating the murders, a rare occurrence in a place where justice was often as scarce as water, he was found innocent, likely due to his growing influence and the fear he inspired in potential witnesses. Those who might have testified to his involvement mysteriously changed their stories or failed to appear. By this point, Stanton had achieved complete control over the town that bore his name. The stage line, postal service, and primary mercantile business all operated under his direction. Even the local justice system had proven incapable of touching him. But his reign would not last. Stanton's downfall came when he made inappropriate advances toward a young Mexican girl named Froilana, who was a close relative of Lucero, leader of a second gang in Weaver. In an ironic parallel to Stanton's monastery expulsion, his death would come about due to moral reasons. The confirmation of Stanton's death came from an unexpected encounter on a dusty trail near the Mexican border. Tom Pearson, traveling from Crown King, came across a rider pushing his horse hard toward the south. It was Lucero, looking over his shoulder as he fled. Recognizing Pearson as someone unconnected to Stanton's operation, Lucero reined in his horse long enough to make a startling confession. "I've killed Stanton, and I'm headed for the border." Pearson's response revealed the community's true sentiment toward the town's namesake. "Stick around. We'll get you a reward." The quick wit reflected what many felt, but few dared speak aloud: that Stanton's death was viewed not as a crime to be avenged, but as liberation from a tyrant who had ruled through manipulation and fear. News of Stanton's death spread quickly through the mining district. Some expected chaos to follow, a power vacuum to be filled by violence as Stanton's associates scrambled for control. But something unexpected happened instead. The community seemed to exhale collectively, returning to the business of mining and commerce without the shadow of Stanton's influence. But as years passed, the gold deposits began to thin. What had once been nuggets lying on the ground became ever more difficult to extract. The town began its slow decline, mirroring the fate of many boom towns across the American West. As the 20th century progressed, Stanton joined the ranks of Arizona's ghost towns, places where dreams had flared brightly before fading into desert dust. Today, Stanton exists only as a memory and a few remaining structures. Located approximately 1.5 miles north and 6 miles east of Congress Junction, the site features 3 large buildings marking where the old town once stood. Unfortunately for history enthusiasts, the area is now heavily restricted, surrounded by signs warning against trespassing, prospecting, and filing of claims. A few hundred yards north stands an occupied residence with additional warnings. The story of Stanton encapsulates the American West's complex legacy, discovery and opportunity alongside greed, violence, and moral corruption. The gold that brought people together ultimately tore their community apart under the influence of a man willing to do anything for power. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest gold story. If you would like to contribute to my channel, join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for the image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. Imagine a bustling frontier town where fortunes were made and lost overnight. A place where the thunderous rhythm of locomotive wheels meeting steel rails provided the heartbeat for an ambitious settlement determined to become the great American city of the West. A town where miners, freighters, and fortune seekers converged at the crossroads of America's first transcontinental railroad and the rich mineral veins of Montana. Welcome to Corinne, Utah, a town that rose like a phoenix in 1869, burned bright with promise and prosperity, and then faded into the shadows of history, all within the span of a single generation. Today, we'll uncover the remarkable story of how this ambitious non-Mormon settlement became the vital artery between the Transcontinental Railroad and the booming mines of Montana, only to see its lifeblood diverted by competing railroad interests and the powerful influence of Brigham Young's Mormon empire. The story of Corinne begins in 1868 with a group of ambitious real estate speculators who saw an opportunity in the approaching completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. Unlike most Utah settlements, Corinne wasn't founded by Mormon pioneers seeking religious sanctuary. Instead, it was established by businessmen with their eyes firmly fixed on profit, particularly the profit to be made from connecting the new railroad to the mineral riches of Montana. G. House, chief locating engineer for the Union Pacific Railroad, laid out the town site in early 1869, recognizing that this bend in the Bear River offered more strategic potential than the lonely, barren promontory, where the famous Golden Spike would soon be driven. The town was initially named Bear River, then briefly Connor, after General Patrick E. Connor, an outspoken critic of Mormon influence in the territory. But the name that stuck was Corinne, possibly named after the first child born in the settlement, the daughter of General J. A. Williamson, who became the town's first mayor. Others claim the town was named after Corinne Levant, a famous actress who toured Utah several times and later performed in the town's Grand Opera House. Whatever the origin of its name, Corinne was designed with grand aspirations. The town plan even reserved an entire block for a university, signaling the founders' belief that they were establishing not just another railroad stop, but a cultural and commercial powerhouse that would surpass Salt Lake City as the most important settlement in the Great Basin. While many railroad towns sprung up across the American West during this period, what made Corinne special was its strategic position as the southern railhead for the booming mining operations of western Montana. This wasn't just another whistle stop. It was the gateway to mineral wealth. By the spring of 1869, just months after its founding, Corinne had transformed from empty prairie to a bustling hub of commerce. From Corinne's warehouses flowed a constant stream of mining supplies, equipment, and provisions bound for the mines of Montana. The clatter of freight wagons and the shouts of teamsters filled the air as massive shipments were transferred from railroad cars to wagon trains. Meanwhile, mine operators, investors, and laborers traveled through Corinne on their journey between the mines and the eastern financial centers. To handle the substantial financial transactions generated by this mining traffic, Corinne established itself as the first major money center in the county. Several banks opened their doors, processing the payments for mining equipment, managing the transportation of precious metals, and financing new mining ventures. For a brief, glorious moment, Corinne served as the financial nexus between East Coast capital and Western mineral wealth. With money flowing freely through town, Corinne quickly developed the boisterous character of a frontier boomtown. By 1870, just a year after its founding, the town boasted 28 saloons and 2 dance halls, where miners and railroad workers spent their hard-earned wages. Multiple gambling dens offered games of chance to those hoping to strike it rich without the back-breaking labor of mining. Several hotels housed what polite society referred to as ladies of the night, or soiled doves, an estimated 80-odd women who catered to the town's predominantly male population of railroad workers, miners, and freight handlers. The town's newspaper, the Utah Reporter, moved from Salt Lake City to Corinne in April 1869, with editor J.H. Beadle providing boosterish coverage of the town's rapid growth. Later, the Corinne Daily Journal joined the media landscape, though it operated for only a few months, a reminder of the volatile nature of frontier economies. As the last major railroad boomtown in the region, Corinne was central to the Union Pacific's regional strategy, but the town's leaders weren't content with just being a railroad terminal. They dreamed of expanding Corinne's transportation network in innovative ways to strengthen its position as a mining gateway. One of the most ambitious ventures was the attempt to establish steamboat service on the Great Salt Lake. A steamboat named the City of Corinne was launched with great fanfare, intended to create a water route that would further enhance the town's shipping capabilities. Unfortunately, the project ultimately failed due to the unpredictable fluctuations in the lake's water level, which made regular service impossible. Despite this setback for several years, Corinne maintained its dominant position as the primary freighting point for Montana's mines. However, the town's prosperity rested on a precarious foundation. In 1871, the Mormon Church, under Brigham Young's leadership, began construction of the narrow-gauge Utah Northern Railroad, extending northward from Ogden. This competing transportation route posed a direct threat to Corinne's position as the gateway to Montana. By 1874, the Utah Northern Railroad had reached Franklin, Idaho, fundamentally altering the transportation economics of the region. Suddenly, shipping mining supplies from Franklin to Montana required a whole lot less time and trouble than going to Corinne. The steady stream of freight that had been Corinne's lifeblood began to dry up. The decline was further accelerated by a diphtheria epidemic in 1872, which caused many deaths and prompted a significant exodus from the town. As the mining connection weakened, Corinne's population dwindled. Buildings stood abandoned or were dismantled for lumber. Some structures were even relocated to surrounding farms as the town's footprint contracted. By 1877, Corinne was largely abandoned, with the surrounding farmers moving in to occupy what remained. The population stabilized at around 100 residents, a mere shadow of the bustling boomtown that had existed just a few years earlier. The final blow came in 1903 when the Southern Pacific Railroad, which had taken over the Central Pacific, built a trestle across the Great Salt Lake. This engineering marvel created a straight level route from Ogden to Lucin, eliminating the tortuous mountain route through Corinne and Promontory. After this, railroad activities in Corinne were reduced to occasional local peddler freights. From a thriving mining gateway, Corinne transformed into what one historian described as a typical rural Mormon town. Ironic given its origins as an anti-Mormon stronghold. Between 1920 and 1970, the population stabilized between 450, 500 residents, with the 1970 census, recording 471 people living in what had once been envisioned as the Great American City of the West. Corinne's role as a mining gateway wasn't just shaped by geography and economics. It was profoundly influenced by the religious and political tensions that defined Utah territory in the late 19th century. Founded primarily by non-Mormons, Corinne quickly became a stronghold of anti-Mormon sentiment and the headquarters of the American Liberal Party, formed by Utah independents who opposed Mormon dominance in territorial affairs. General George R. Maxwell used Corinne as a base for his campaigns against polygamy, and the town's leaders even attempted to have the territorial capital moved from Salt Lake City to Corinne, citing the bad influence of polygamy. This political stance put Corinne in direct conflict with Brigham Young and the Mormon Church, who opposed the town's development due to its brothels and what they termed sinful doings. Some historians argue that the construction of the Utah Northern Railroad was motivated not just by economic considerations, but by a desire to undermine Corinne's position as the gateway to Montana's mines. As Corinne's position as a mining gateway began to weaken, the town turned to other, sometimes questionable, enterprises to maintain its economy. Smelter operations processed ore from the mines, with the slag initially used for street paving. In an ironic twist, during the 1880s, it was discovered that these slag-paved streets actually contained workable ore, and the material was dug up and sent back to the smelters for reprocessing. Perhaps the most notorious of Corinne's later ventures was the divorce mill, operated by lawyers Johnson and Underdunk. This enterprise offered what they called hot machine divorces for a $2.50 gold piece, roughly equivalent to $1.50-60 today. The operation even allowed for remote control divorces, where customers could mail in their information and receive dissolution of their marriages without ever setting foot in Corinne. This divorce business operated for several years before being ruled illegal, leaving the courts to untangle approximately 2,000 cases. It's a bizarre footnote to the story of a town that had once served as the gateway to Montana's mineral wealth, now reduced to selling quick divorces to maintain some semblance of its former commercial importance. So the next time you drive through this quiet corner of Utah, take a moment to imagine the scene in 1869. Freight wagons lined up at the railroad depot, teamsters loading mining equipment bound for Montana, banks processing transactions that would finance new mineral discoveries, saloons and hotels doing a roaring trade, and civic leaders confidently predicting that their town would soon surpass Salt Lake City as the jewel of the Great Basin. In that moment, Corinne was more than just a dot on the map. It was the gateway to the mineral wealth that helped build the American West. Though its glory days were brief, its story provides a fascinating window into how mining, transportation, religion, and politics intersected to shape the development of the American frontier. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold story. In a remote valley of southwestern New Mexico, nestled between rugged mountains and vast expanses of wilderness, stands what remains of a town where only the wind speaks now. 5 families remain where hundreds once lived, their homes scattered across a landscape that once hummed with the energy of commerce and ambition. This is Alma, a place where gold, blood, and outlaws wrote a quintessentially American frontier story that the desert has nearly reclaimed, leaving only whispers of its tumultuous past. And buried somewhere beneath these sagebrush hills might still lie the secret that died with a man named Wilcox, a gold claim so promising that its location went to the grave with him during an Apache attack, a secret that could have changed everything. The year was 1878. Ulysses S. Grant had just completed his presidency. The wounds of the Civil War were still healing, and the American West remained a frontier of both peril and promise. It was in this era that a small group of determined settlers loaded their possessions into sturdy wagons and set out from Prescott, Arizona territory. John Keller, a man described in accounts as having iron determination, led the party alongside Robert Stubblefield, Maurice Coates, John Roberts, W. H. Beavers, and Morris Smith. With their families in tow, they traveled for weeks until they reached the verdant expanse that would later be called the Frisco Valley, named for the nearby San Francisco River. These weren't gold seekers, at least not initially. They were ranchers looking for good land to establish a new life. They built cabins, established ranches, and created a community far from civilization. In the beginning, their focus was simple: develop an industrious life of ranching while taking precautions against potential conflicts with the local Apache tribes. The land they settled had been Apache territory for generations. At first, the indigenous people chose not to disturb the newcomers. This peaceful coexistence lasted until the spring of 1879, when the spark that would ignite decades of violence first flared. In the pale light of dawn, Apache warriors silently descended upon John Keller's ranch, driving off cattle that represented not just wealth, but survival on the frontier. Discovering the theft, a furious Keller refused to accept this loss without response. He gathered 3 other settlers, men who had staked everything on this harsh land, and together they tracked the raiders through rugged terrain, following hoof prints and broken branches into the depths of Whitewater Canyon. There, among the echoing rock walls and scrubby vegetation, they devised a strategy born of frontier cunning, tying a saddled horse to a juniper tree as bait, while they concealed themselves among the rocks with rifles ready. When the Apache warriors emerged from the shadows to claim this apparent prize, the settlers opened fire, the reports of their weapons shattering the canyon's silence. When the echo of gunshots faded, 3 of the 5 Apache men lay dead among the stones. What the settlers couldn't have known was that among the fallen was Toribio, not just any warrior but the beloved son-in-law of the formidable Chief Victorio, a man respected and feared throughout the territory. That single death, one moment in a remote canyon, would cast a blood-red shadow over Alma's future, setting in motion a chain of violence that would define the region for years to come. Chief Victorio was not merely another tribal leader. He was a brilliant military strategist who understood the power of coordinated attacks. In April 1880, he launched a devastating revenge campaign, orchestrating simultaneous assaults on multiple settlements: Alma, Cooney, and Pleasanton. The siege of Alma lasted 24 hours, leaving many settlers dead or injured. One of those who died was a man known only as Wilcox in historical records, and here emerges the first golden thread in Alma's tapestry. Just days before his death, Wilcox had discovered a gold claim, potentially a rich one. But when Apache arrows found him, that secret location died with him. A fortune waiting somewhere in these hills, its location lost to time and violence. Life in Alma continued under the constant threat of attack. By 1885, Geronimo's raids had intensified the danger. Mail coaches traveled only at night because daylight journeys were too perilous. The Apaches communicated using small piles of stones with broken twigs and grass, messages completely unintelligible to white settlers. Coach drivers would routinely destroy these stone messages when they found them, a small battle in an ongoing war. The psychological toll on the settlers was immense. Every day brought uncertainty, every unfamiliar sound potential danger. Yet despite these challenges, Alma began to grow, especially after 1880. And the catalyst for this growth wasn't ranching. It was gold and silver discovered at the nearby Cooney mine. That discovery transformed Alma virtually overnight. What had been a small ranching settlement of simple cabins suddenly erupted with activity as news of the Cooney mine's riches spread across the territory. Prospectors arrived daily, their faces dusty from travel but eyes bright with possibility. Merchants followed, sensing opportunity in the miners' needs. The town became the central hub, the beating heart of commerce, for surrounding ranches and a growing constellation of mining camps with names now lost to history. By the mid-1880s, Alma had developed into a proper frontier town. Along the main street stood an impressive array of businesses. 3 saloons where miners could wash away the dust of their labor with whiskey that burned all the way down. 2 general stores stocking everything from mining tools to ladies' bonnets. A 2-story hotel offering clean beds to travelers, a blacksmith whose forge glowed from before dawn until after dusk, a shoemaker crafting and repairing the boots that were essential for the rough terrain. The town had even attracted professional services, a physician tending to injuries and illnesses that were constant companions in mining life, and a justice of the peace maintaining some semblance of order in this rapidly expanding community. The population swelled to 150 people, a number that might seem modest by today's standards, but represented significant growth for an isolated frontier town where each new arrival had to make a deliberate choice to endure the hardships of the region. Alma was becoming a proper community with its own distinct identity, carefully balancing between serving both the mining and ranching economies that sustained it. The W.S. Ranch was a major cattle operation near Alma, and its cowboys would ride into town for Sunday sermons. Afterward, the entire congregation, preacher included, would typically head to the saloon across the street for what they called a thirst quencher. In one memorable incident, the preacher indulged a bit too liberally and passed out completely. The cowboys, in typical frontier humor, bound his hands and feet, placed him in a wagon, and sent him home. His dignity was so shattered that he refused to preach for the cowboys ever again. The W.S. Ranch connection to Alma takes on new significance in the late 1890s, when the ranch was managed by Captain William French. Unknown to French, he had hired some notorious employees. A ranch hand calling himself Jim Lowe was actually Butch Cassidy, and William H. McGinnis was really Elza Lay, both members of the infamous Wild Bunch gang. Interestingly, cattle rustling in the area stopped completely after these men started working at the ranch. They weren't just any outlaws. Historical accounts describe the Wild Bunch as good workers during their time at the W.S. Ranch. Captain French eventually discovered Lou's true identity but liked him so much that he offered him the position of foreman, believing Cassidy intended to go straight. Cassidy declined the offer, concerned that the ranch might suffer if discovered to be headquarters for the Wild Bunch. There was an honor among thieves that extended even to protecting those who had unwittingly employed them. But the Wild Bunch connection to Alma doesn't end there. McGinnis, or Elza Lay, eventually was identified as a participant in a train robbery near Folsom, New Mexico. After serving his prison sentence, he returned to Alma around 1904 and lived there for 2 years, staying with Louis and Walter Jones, who had built a large merchandise store in town. McGinnis claimed knowledge of money buried under a juniper tree on the Mexican border. He left town on an expedition and returned exactly 13 days later with $58,000, an enormous sum for that time. What did he do with this fortune? He casually dumped it in a corner of the utility room at the Jones Brothers store, where it remained untouched for several months before he finally took it to Wyoming. Reports indicate that he went straight after that, investing in a cattle ranch. By 1913, Alma had reached its zenith, described in records as a thriving and thrifty community with approximately 400 residents. The gold and silver from nearby mines had created a prosperity that seemed like it might endure indefinitely. But like so many mining towns across the American West, the boom couldn't last. By 1936, the population had dwindled to around 100 people. The post office had already been closed for 5 years. Alma's halcyon days, as they were called, were over. It's a life cycle repeated across the mining West discovery: boom, decline, abandonment. But few places pack as much drama into that cycle as Alma did. Apache wars, lost gold claims, famous outlaws, buried treasure, all played out against the backdrop of frontier hardship and golden opportunity. The story of Alma distills the entire Western experience into one small town's history. Perhaps what's most haunting about places like Alma are not the physical remnants of what was, but the persistent echoes of what might have been. History is shaped as much by chance as by intention, and Alma's story is riddled with pivotal moments where fate could have turned in entirely different directions. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold story. Check out my large catalog of Southwest videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. If you like a certain image from my videos, tell me in comments and give timestamp. Happy trails. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.